It was a cold morning, the kind where the air feels heavier than usual. A father, who had been up for hours, was in the kitchen making breakfast for his son. The small apartment smelled of cereal and the faint trace of coffee. His son, a bright-eyed little boy, sat at the table scribbling on a piece of paper, his mind clearly elsewhere. The father glanced at the clock and sighed. Time was slipping away. Today was important. He had an interview at 10 a.m. with a company he'd been eyeing for months. The opportunity was everything. If he could land this job, it would change their lives. No more scraping by paycheck to paycheck. No more worrying if he would be able to buy the medicine his son needed when he was sick, or pay the rent on time. This job could finally give them a shot at something more. He checked his watch again. His son, a 5-year-old with a world of energy, had been a handful this morning. Between trying to get him dressed and running around the apartment, it was all he could do to stay calm. But now, with only 30 minutes left before the interview, things were starting to feel more like a race. The boy didn't understand the urgency. To him, today was just another day filled with cartoons, toys, and the comforting routine that came with a father who always did his best for him. The father, though, could feel the weight of every minute slipping by. He needed to make sure his son was taken care of while also not missing his big chance. "Hey, buddy," the father said, trying to stay calm. "I need you to eat your breakfast quickly, okay? Daddy has to leave soon." The boy nodded but didn't seem fully aware of the seriousness of the situation. He was distracted by his cereal, his small hands spilling milk over the table. The father quickly cleaned up, trying not to lose his cool, but it wasn't easy. Between getting his son dressed, making sure he had everything for school, and getting ready for the interview, it felt like the world was working against him. But he kept pushing through. He had to. He quickly grabbed his suit from the closet, laid it on the bed, and started to get dressed. He had rehearsed his answers over and over the night before, and now the moment was finally here. His mind raced with thoughts of how the interview would go. Would he be able to impress them? Could he make a lasting impact? He needed this job. He wanted his son to have the life he deserved, not the struggle that had been his own. As he finished tying his tie, his son called out from the kitchen. "Daddy, my stomach hurts." The father froze, his heart sinking. He looked at the clock. There was no time to waste. He quickly walked into the kitchen to check on his son, who looked up at him with worried eyes. He wasn't the type to complain about pain, so the father's concern deepened. He gently felt his son's forehead. A fever. It wasn't a high fever, but it was enough to stop him in his tracks. He couldn't leave his son like this. The boy needed attention, medicine, and care. He couldn't risk leaving him alone with no one to watch over him. His mind immediately ran through the possibilities. Could he call someone to help? No, his friends were busy and his family lived too far away. It was just him and his son. He couldn't just leave him like this, not with the way his son was looking at him, needing him now more than ever. The interview would have to wait. It was as if his world had just come to a halt. The father stood there for a moment, feeling his frustration rise. This was supposed to be his chance, the moment he had worked for. But his son needed him more than anything else right now. He couldn't be in 2 places at once. "Don't worry, buddy. I'll take care of you," he said softly, trying to sound calm even though his mind was racing. He kissed his son on the forehead and began rummaging through the cabinets for medicine. The boy was already resting his head on the table, his small hands clutching his stomach. He had been dreaming about this opportunity for so long. The interview could have been the turning point for both of them. But now it didn't matter. All that mattered was making sure his son was okay. The father filled a glass of water, gave his son the medicine, and then sat next to him, rubbing his back gently. He glanced at the clock again. The interview would begin in just 20 minutes. He could still make it if he rushed, but he knew it wouldn't be the right thing to do. He couldn't leave his son in this condition, not when he was clearly feeling unwell. The father sighed deeply. There was no easy choice. There was only one path he could take, and it was the one that involved his son's well-being. The job, as much as he needed it, could wait. He looked at his son, the little boy who relied on him for everything. His heart swelled with love and determination. He wasn't going to let his son suffer because of an interview. It wasn't worth it. "Stay here for a little while, okay?" the father whispered. Knowing his son would likely fall asleep soon, "I'm going to make you some soup." He turned away, trying not to let his disappointment show. The interview was slipping away from him, but he knew he had made the right choice. In the grand scheme of things, a missed opportunity could always be reclaimed. But his son, his precious boy, needed him now. With the soup simmering on the stove, the father sat down by his son's side, waiting for him to fall asleep. He couldn't help but wonder how many other fathers, struggling just like him, had faced moments like this. The harsh realities of life, the constant juggling act, the sacrifices made for the ones we love. This was his reality. And it was one he would never regret, even if it meant letting go of something as important as a big interview. His son's soft breathing filled the room, a reminder that the most important things in life weren't the jobs, the promotions, or the opportunities. It was the people we loved. And in that moment, the father knew that he would continue to give everything he had to make sure his son had the best future possible. The job interview could wait. For now, his son needed him. The morning passed slowly as the father took care of his son, making sure he was as comfortable as possible. The little boy eventually fell asleep, his small chest rising and falling gently with each breath. The father sat beside him, watching over him with quiet affection. It was moments like these that made him feel the weight of responsibility, but also the deep connection he shared with his child. He wanted nothing more than to protect him, to give him a life better than his own. As the hours ticked by, the father couldn't help but think about the interview he had missed. It felt like a distant dream now. He had prepared for weeks, researched the company, practiced his answers, and even planned what he would wear. But here he was, sitting in a quiet room, watching his son sleep. His mind kept drifting back to what could have been. The possibility of finally landing that job and giving his son everything he'd ever dreamed of. It was hard to shake the feeling of loss, even though he knew he'd made the right decision. The afternoon came and the boy finally woke up, his fever subsiding. He looked up at his father with tired eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Daddy, I'm feeling better now," he said in a soft voice. The father smiled back, relief flooding over him. "I'm glad to hear that, buddy. How about some soup?" The boy nodded eagerly, sitting up a little straighter in bed. The father got up to prepare the soup, his mind still swirling with thoughts of the missed opportunity. He couldn't help but wonder if there was still a chance for him to get another interview. But deep down he knew that things didn't always work out the way we expected. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, and sometimes it was hard to see the bigger picture. As he stirred the soup, the father heard a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and his curiosity piqued. He quickly wiped his hands on a towel and went to the door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see an elderly woman standing there. She was small, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a long coat that seemed a little too heavy for the mild weather. "Hello," she said with a warm smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having a little trouble with my groceries. Would you mind helping me carry them upstairs?" The father hesitated for a moment. He didn't recognize her, and he was still feeling a bit frazzled from the morning's events. But there was something about her gentle demeanor that made him want to help. "Of course," he replied. "Let me grab my jacket." The elderly woman thanked him, and he stepped outside, ready to assist her. They walked down the hallway of the building, and the father couldn't help but notice how slow and careful the woman moved. She seemed fragile, though there was a quiet strength in her presence. As they reached the elevator, she began to chat with him, asking about his day and how he was doing. "I'm sure you're a busy man," she said, looking at him with a knowing smile. "But sometimes it's nice to slow down and help someone else, isn't it?" The father chuckled softly, unsure of how to respond. He didn't feel like he was busy, not anymore anyway. His mind kept returning to the interview he'd missed, but he didn't want to burden this kind woman with his worries. As they reached her apartment, the woman invited him inside to set the groceries down. The father hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, the door creaking as he entered. The apartment was small but well kept, with a cozy feeling that made him feel at ease. The woman thanked him again as he set the bags on the counter. "I appreciate your kindness," she said, looking up at him with sincere gratitude. "Not everyone would have stopped to help. I'm sure you had something important to do today." The father felt a slight pang of guilt. "Actually, I had an interview today," he said, almost absent-mindedly. "But I missed it because my son wasn't feeling well." The woman's expression softened. "Family always comes first," she said. That's the most important thing, no matter what else is going on in your life. The father smiled, grateful for her understanding. Thank you, he said. It means a lot to hear that. She nodded as if she had seen the weight of his responsibilities. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? Sometimes when we think we're facing a setback, we're actually being led to something better. The father raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. What do you mean? The woman smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mysterious warmth. While sometimes the choices we make, the sacrifices we think are so important, lead us down a path we never expected. Maybe missing your interview wasn't such a bad thing after all. The father was about to respond when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from the company he had applied to. He felt his heart race as he read the message. We would still like to meet with you even though you missed the interview. Can you come in tomorrow at the same time? A rush of emotions flooded through him. He had almost forgotten about the interview, lost in the whirlwind of caring for his son and helping the elderly woman. But now, here was the opportunity again, right in front of him. The woman watched him as he stared at his phone, a knowing smile on her face. Sometimes the world has a way of giving us second chances, she said softly. The father couldn't believe it. The opportunity was still there, and this time he would be ready. I think you might be right, he said, looking up at her with a grateful smile. The woman patted his shoulder gently. Just remember, everything happens for a reason. You've already made the right choices. The rest will follow. With that, she thanked him once more for his help and sent him on his way. As the father stepped back into the hallway, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The weight of the missed interview had lifted, and in its place there was a renewed sense of hope. As he walked back to his apartment, he couldn't help but wonder about the mysterious woman. Who was she really? Why had she appeared at just the right moment? There was something about her that felt almost fateful. But he pushed the thought aside, focusing on the good news he had just received. He still had a chance, and this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. The next morning came quickly, and the father found himself wide awake, long before his alarm went off. He sat up in bed, rubbing his tired eyes, his mind already racing. He had the second chance he'd been hoping for. The interview was back on. But there was no time to waste. The night before had been filled with anxiety, his mind swirling with thoughts of how to prepare, how to make a good impression, and most importantly, how to ensure his son was okay while he was gone. His son, still a bit under the weather, had been sleeping soundly through the night. The fever had broken, but the boy still looked pale, his cheeks flushed from the lingering illness. The father, knowing he had to leave soon, made a silent promise to himself that he would be back as quickly as possible. He would make sure his son had everything he needed before he left, and he would do his best to make this opportunity count. After a quick breakfast of cereal and toast, the father helped his son get ready for the day. He took his time, making sure his son felt comfortable and safe despite still not feeling his best. The little boy, now sitting at the kitchen table coloring, seemed to be in a better mood, but the father could tell that the illness had left its mark. Still, he had to leave soon. He couldn't miss this chance again. I'll be back as soon as I can, okay, buddy? The father said softly, bending down to give his son a quick hug. You're going to be just fine here. I'll make sure to call you when I'm on my way back. His son looked up with a weak smile. Be careful, Daddy. The father felt a lump rise in his throat as he ruffled his son's hair. I will, and I'll bring you something nice when I come home. With one last glance at his son, he grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The walk to the bus stop felt like a blur. His thoughts were everywhere, on the job, his son, the woman from yesterday. He couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was somehow connected to all of this. The kind words she had spoken the day before kept echoing in his mind. Everything happens for a reason, she had said. You've already made the right choices. The rest will follow. He had no idea who she really was, but her words had stayed with him, and for some reason he believed them. Maybe she was right. Maybe this interview, even though he had missed it once, was still part of a bigger plan. It wasn't just about the job, it was about what he had learned along the way. About the sacrifices, the hard work, and the love he had for his son. The bus ride felt endless. He glanced at the clock, seeing the time slip away with every stop the bus made. His heart pounded in his chest as he thought about all the things that could go wrong. Would he be able to make it on time? Would the interview panel even take him seriously? Knowing that he had missed the first meeting, his nerves were getting the best of him, but he tried to push the fear aside. He had made it this far. Now all he had to do was show up. When the bus finally pulled up in front of the building, he stepped off and looked up at the tall, imposing structure. It seemed like the kind of place that housed big dreams and bigger expectations. He stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He was ready. Inside the building, the atmosphere was sleek and modern. The air felt different here, crisp and professional, a far cry from the small apartment he had left behind. He walked up to the receptionist, his palms a little sweaty, and told her his name. She smiled warmly and directed him to the elevators. As he waited in the lobby, his mind raced. He thought back to the woman from yesterday. Could she have known something he didn't? Was there more to her than she had let on? The thought lingered in his mind, but he quickly pushed it away as he heard his name being called. He followed the receptionist to a large conference room, where 3 people were seated at a long table. The room was quiet, the air thick with expectation. The panel, a mix of men and women, looked up as he entered. One of them, a woman in a sharp suit, smiled and gestured for him to take a seat. "Thank you for coming in today," she said, her voice calm and confident. "We understand you had an unexpected situation come up yesterday, but we're glad you could join us today." The father nodded, feeling a flush of warmth in his cheeks. "Thank you for giving me another chance," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of nerves. The interview began, and as the questions started to flow, he found himself slipping into a rhythm. The nerves that had gripped him earlier started to fade as he spoke about his experience, his skills, and his passion for the job. He could feel the panel's eyes on him, but this time it didn't feel as intimidating as he thought it would. The interview wasn't about perfection. It was about showing who he was and what he could bring to the table. His answers flowed naturally, and the more he spoke, the more confident he became. He spoke about his dedication to hard work, his ability to balance his responsibilities as a father with his professional ambitions, and his willingness to go the extra mile. He shared his story, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the things that had driven him to this point in his life. As the interview continued, he noticed that the panel seemed to be taking a special interest in him. They asked questions that were more personal, more about who he was as a person rather than just his professional qualifications. And that's when it hit him. This was more than just a job. This was an opportunity to show who he truly was, beyond the resume and the professional facade. He found himself telling them about his son, about the challenges he had faced as a single father, and the moments that had shaped him. He spoke about the day he had missed the interview, how he had made the decision to stay home and care for his son, even though it meant letting go of an important opportunity. The panel seemed to listen intently, their expressions softening as he spoke. It wasn't just his skills they were interested in, it was his character. They wanted to know if he was the kind of person who would show up when it mattered, who would make the right choices, even when it was hard. Finally, the interview came to an end. The father felt exhausted, but there was a sense of relief too. He had done his best. Now all he could do was wait. As he stood up to leave, the woman from the panel, who had been asking most of the questions, smiled at him. "We appreciate your time today," she said. "We'll be in touch soon. And just so you know, we were very impressed with your answers. We'll definitely be considering you for the position." His heart swelled with hope, but he tried not to let himself get too excited. He had done what he could. Now, it was out of his hands. As he walked out of the building, he couldn't help but think about the woman he had met the day before. What if she had somehow known? What if her words had been part of some strange twist of fate? He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. He had made it. Now all he could do was wait for the call that would determine the rest of his future. And no matter what happened, he knew he had done his best. The days that followed the interview felt like a blur. The father found himself slipping into a routine, taking care of his son, working long hours at the part-time job he had, and keeping his fingers crossed for the call he hoped would come. His son was feeling better each day, though he still wasn't back to his usual energetic self. The father didn't mind, though. He was just happy to see his son on the mend, and he made sure to spend every moment he could with him, knowing how quickly time passed. The wait for the company's decision seemed endless. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart skipped a beat, but every time it was just a text from a friend or a reminder about work. He tried not to dwell on it, but the uncertainty hung over him like a cloud. He'd come so far, missed his first interview, made the choice to help his son, then found himself sitting in that conference room giving it his all. Now all he could do was wait. One evening, after putting his son to bed, the father sat down at the kitchen table looking at the bills that had piled up. He knew this part-time job wasn't enough to cover everything. It wasn't enough to get ahead. He thought back to the dream he had when he first became a father, about giving his child a life free from the struggles he had known. But reality was different. Reality was long hours, little pay, and an ever-growing pile of bills that never seemed to go down. The phone buzzed again. His heart raced. He picked it up, his hands shaking a little. It wasn't the usual text, it was an email, and as he read through it, the words felt surreal. "We're pleased to inform you." He had to read it twice, then a third time. The job was his. They wanted him. He was offered the position. A flood of emotions rushed through him. Relief, joy, a sense of victory he hadn't felt in a long time. The moment he had worked so hard for was finally here. He wanted to jump for joy, to call his son and tell him the news, but he knew it wasn't quite the time for that. The little boy was asleep and the father didn't want to wake him. Instead, he sat there quietly, processing what had just happened. His mind raced with possibilities. What would this mean for them? No more struggling to make ends meet. No more choosing between buying groceries or paying the rent. It was a new beginning, a fresh start. But with the joy came a twinge of doubt. Could he really handle this new responsibility? Was he ready for it? The job would be demanding, and he would need to prove himself in a competitive environment. The pressure was immense, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he had a shot, like he wasn't just treading water but actually moving forward. He could breathe again. He took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and called the company back to confirm his acceptance. They were thrilled to hear from him and welcomed him warmly. He set the date to start, and with that it was official. He had a new job. The next day, the father woke up with a new sense of purpose. He got his son ready for the day and packed a lunch for him before taking him to school. As they walked to the door, the little boy smiled up at him. "Daddy, are you going to work today?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. The father nodded. "Yes, buddy. Today is a big day. Daddy's starting his new job." The boy's eyes lit up. "Does that mean we can get ice cream today?" The father laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "Maybe. We'll see." He dropped his son off at school and headed to the new job. As he walked into the office building for the first time, his nerves returned. The building felt even bigger now that he was a part of it. But as he stepped through the door, he was met with warm smiles from the staff and a sense of belonging that he hadn't expected. The company was everything he had hoped for and more, a place where people worked hard but also cared for each other. Throughout the day, he felt a sense of accomplishment, but also the weight of the responsibility he now carried. The work was challenging, but it was the kind of challenge that pushed him to be better, to think outside the box, and to give it his all. There were moments when he questioned his abilities, moments when he doubted himself, but he reminded himself why he was there, to give his son the life he deserved. As the days went on, he settled into the rhythm of his new job. He was learning new things, meeting new people, and gradually proving himself to be an asset to the team. The work wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling. And with every passing day, the father grew more confident. He was finally doing something that mattered, something that would make a difference for his family. His son, too, seemed to be thriving. He was back to his energetic self, and every evening they would talk about their day. The father would listen intently as his son told him about the games he played at school and the friends he made. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. It was enough. One evening after work, the father took his son to the park. They sat on a bench watching the sunset as the little boy ran around, laughing and playing. The father couldn't help but smile. He had come so far. The hard work, the sacrifice, it had all led to this moment. He had a job he was proud of, a son he adored, and the promise of a future that was brighter than he had ever imagined. But as he sat there, watching his son play, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, more than he realized. The woman he had helped the other day, The one who had offered him the words of wisdom still lingered in his mind. He hadn't seen her since that day, and he couldn't help but wonder if she had known more than she let on. Had she seen something in him that he hadn't yet recognized in himself? He couldn't answer that, but one thing was certain. She had played a part in this journey, even if he didn't fully understand how. As the evening came to a close, the father and son headed home, their hearts light and their spirits high. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, the father felt ready to face whatever came next. He had learned a lot over the past few weeks about sacrifice, about kindness, about second chances. And he knew that no matter what, he would keep moving forward, for his son, for their future. And somewhere deep down, he felt like he had already won. The days after the interview passed in a blur. The father felt like he was living in two worlds, the one where he was constantly worrying about his son, and the one where he was pushing himself to prove he was worthy of the job. Every day he would wake up early, make breakfast for his son, and get ready for work. He was doing everything he could to keep up with the new demands of his job, but it was hard. Some nights he would fall asleep on the couch, too exhausted to even make it to bed. His son, though, seemed to be thriving. He was back to his usual energetic self, running around the apartment, playing with his toys, and telling his father all about his day at school. The father cherished these moments. His son's laughter, the sound of his small feet racing across the floor. These were the things that kept him going, even when everything felt overwhelming. The father tried not to dwell too much on the job offer, but it was hard. It was always there in the back of his mind, waiting for the phone call that would either confirm or deny everything he had worked so hard for. Every time his phone rang, his heart skipped a beat. But the call never came. The days dragged on, and the father found himself wondering if they had changed their minds. He had given everything he had in the interview. Had he done enough? One evening, after a particularly long day, the father was sitting at the kitchen table trying to unwind with a cup of tea. His son was asleep in the next room, and the apartment was eerily quiet. He glanced at the clock and sighed. Another day had come and gone, and still there was no word. The uncertainty was starting to take a toll on him. He had always been the kind of person who worked hard, who did whatever it took to provide for his family. But now it felt like all that effort might not be enough. As he sat there, lost in thought, the doorbell rang. Startled, he stood up and walked toward the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, so the sudden sound of the bell made his heart race. He opened the door slowly, unsure of who could be on the other side. To his surprise, standing in front of him was the elderly woman he had helped with her groceries a few days ago. She looked exactly the same, small, with silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She smiled at him warmly, as if their last meeting had only been moments ago. "Hello, dear," she said kindly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." The father blinked, unsure of what to say. He hadn't expected to see her again, let alone at his door. "No, not at all," he replied. "What brings you here?" The woman hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I just wanted to check in on you to see how things are going. You've been on my mind since we last spoke." The father was taken aback. He hadn't realized that their brief conversation had made such an impression on her. "Things are going okay," he said, his voice soft. "It's been a tough few days, but I'm managing." She nodded knowingly, her eyes twinkling with something unspoken. "I had a feeling you might be going through something," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Life has a way of testing us, doesn't it?" The father was quiet for a moment, unsure of how to respond. "It does," he said finally, looking down at the floor. "But I'll get through it." "I always do." She smiled again, her eyes softening. "I'm sure you will. But sometimes the answers we're looking for are right in front of us. Sometimes it's about timing. You've done everything you can, and now it's just about being patient." He stared at her for a long moment, not fully understanding her words, but feeling like they carried more weight than he could grasp. He wasn't sure what she meant, but there was something reassuring in her presence. Something that made him feel like everything would be okay, even if it didn't feel that way right now. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I've been waiting for that call, but it hasn't come. It's like I'm stuck, like I've given everything I have, but it still isn't enough." The woman placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch warm and comforting. "Sometimes it's not about what we give," she said softly. "It's about who we are. You've shown that you're dedicated, that you care. You've made the right choices. Now trust that the rest will follow." For a moment, the father just stood there, processing her words. He had never been one to believe in fate or destiny, but there was something about the woman that made him want to believe. Her words felt like they held the truth he had been searching for. Maybe he had done everything he could, but he also needed to trust in the process, in the timing of things. Maybe the job offer would come when it was meant to, and maybe he didn't need to carry all the weight on his own. Before he could respond, the woman gave him a knowing look and turned to leave. "I'll let you get back to your evening," she said, her voice warm but firm. "Just remember, everything happens for a reason. Keep doing what you're doing and the right opportunities will come." The father stood at the door watching her walk away, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. It was as if the weight of his uncertainty had been lifted, if only for a moment. He closed the door behind her, standing in the quiet of the apartment trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The woman had said nothing groundbreaking, but her words resonated with him in a way that nothing else had. He walked over to the couch and sat down, his mind still spinning. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but somehow he felt more at peace. Maybe he hadn't made a mistake by missing that first interview. Maybe he had done the right thing by putting his son first. And maybe, just maybe, the job offer was still out there waiting for him. And he just needed to trust that things would unfold as they were meant to. As he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He grabbed it quickly, his heart racing. The message was from the company. "We would like to offer you the position," it read. "Please let us know when you're available to discuss the details." The father's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe it. The offer was finally here, just as the woman had said. It had come at the right time, and it was everything he had hoped for. A wave of relief flooded over him, and he felt like he could finally breathe again. His hard work, his dedication, and his sacrifices had all paid off. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, and he was ready to seize it. As he sat there staring at the phone screen, he realized something. He had done it. He had fought for a better life for his son, and now it was within reach. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like everything was going to be okay.